Tell us what you know, or what, and also what you think is probably true, but maybe may not completely know about his last day or two.
Well, it's slightly speculation. We know he had a kind of 27-point plan, and he was going to follow a rubric laid out by many missionaries before when meeting uncontacted tribes, which was you kind of leave gifts on thoroughfares and pathways and pinch points, and then retreat. And then if the gifts are taken, you come back and you leave more, and you hope over a period of hours or most likely days or weeks to sort of gradually establish friendly contact. Then with the linguistics training that he had, he was going to try and pick up the language and slowly get to know the tribe. And only probably 5 or 10 years down the line was he going to start bringing up Jesus and Christ and Christianity and so on. He was, it was a one-way trip for John, and for him, he hoped that he was going to live, though, and for him, it was going to be as long as it take. But this was a mission that was going to last a lifetime, and as I say, that reflects his sort of meticulous planning, but it also reflects the fact that he was not the kind of colonial imposer that he was accused of being after his death. He was moving incredibly gently and very, very slowly. He was absolutely not trying to sort of push people around. As I say, he had failed to take account of the fact that from the other side, from the Sentinelese, probably because they have experienced disease when they've met outsiders before, and also probably because outsiders have a history of kidnapping them for slavery, they kill people immediately. So he never got to do any of that.
I mean, there is, that's the other side of it, right? I mean, these people did not want him to come. They could not be more clear that they don't want people to come. There's a fear of disease, infection,
that's an interesting...
All of those criticisms are still there, right? I mean, that...
Right, well, okay, but here's the thing. We don't know what they want. The fact that they've killed everybody who've landed on their island is taken as like, oh, well, that's their opinion, that they don't want anybody to come. But actually, is an opinion that's made in perfect ignorance a valid one? I mean, if there was some way to communicate to the Sentinelese the benefits of air conditioning or the internet or jet travel, I don't know if they had that information, whether they would make the same decision. The point is, we can't presume anything. So those that say we know what they wanted, like Survival International, absolutely not true. They're guessing. John was guessing that they'd want to be saved. Survival International is guessing that they want to be alone. But the truth is, we don't know. And probably there's not a uniform opinion. You might have some elders sort of saying, oh, we want to keep things the way they are. But you might have some young kids on the island going, I've seen a speedboat go past. I've seen an airplane go overhead. I'm curious. I think the moment you start presuming, that's one of the lessons of this story. The moment you presume anything, you're heading down the wrong path.
So one of the things the piece does really successfully, this is going to be probably one of my last questions, because we're starting to get questions sort of coming in from the audience. And if anyone else has a question, feel free to send it, because we can just go through those one after the next in just a couple minutes. But one of the things that I found really interesting in the piece was just sort of setting up the mythology of missionaries in the missionary imagination. And you told these amazing stories that were, to me, they were new. I wasn't aware of these people. I think a lot of readers who are not from a background where missionary work is necessarily something that people do, I think they probably wouldn't know about them. But they're interesting, and they were kind of the background of John Allen Chau, right? I mean, I'm talking here about Jim Elliot and about Bruce Olson. Do you want to tell us about those guys and sort of how, how this inspiration for these kinds of trips?
Yeah, they're very different, but they're both, as you say, really interesting. So Jim Elliot was actually raised a few streets away from where John lived. So he'd been to part of a group that went to Ecuador in, I think it was 1956, in very similar circumstances, went to meet an uncontacted tribe, succeeded, even took one member of the tribe for a ride in their plane, and then was killed. And Jim Elliot, ever since, has been held up as this sort of perfect martyr, in an almost kind of cartoonish way. And his writing, his diary, sort of pored over and interpreted. There's a particular line in it, I forget exactly what it is, but it's taken as he knew that he was going to die and he went anyway. So he's like the paragon. Bruce Olson came 15 years later, was another sort of big influence on John. What's interesting about Olson, he did something very similar. Flew to Venezuela, walked into the jungle, eventually got to an area on the border with Brazil, met a tribe, and converted them. He survived, although the tribe did it when they first meet him, try and kill him. Olson was later exposed as a complete fabulist. The whole thing, by people who sort of knew him at the time and, you know, in the jungle. And actually, if you read the book, it reads like fabulism. I mean, he talks about grubs that are a foot long, and you know, he says that the natives are fascinated by bright things. I mean, there's just too many cliches in there. The point is, if you're in the missionary world, he's still a hero. They don't hear that. Well, it's not, as I say in the piece, it's not that they reject the criticism. They don't hear it. They don't hear it. They're deaf to it. Olson, you know, is another paragon for them, and to me, I found that slightly terrifying. You know, mm-hmm. You know, you and I, we spend our lives measuring versions and facts and trying to work out where the truth lies, whereas this is the opposite. This is coming in to the world, knowing the truth, and then mm-hmm. finding the facts to fit it, and that was a real insight into John's mind, because to me, Bruce Olson's, you read his books, it's so obvious he's making it up. It's, you know, if I was an editor and I received that as copy, I'd be like, oh my God, you know. That he was one of John's heroes. And in fact, I talked to a kind of ex-missionary who'd lapsed. You know, he'd gone into the jungle in the Amazon again, had met an uncontacted tribe, and he lost his faith when he realized that the tribe was perfectly happy without God and perhaps had a better hold on spirituality and contentment than he did. You know, so he had what I would call a kind of rational reaction, but he led me through that world and the missionary mindset, which is fascinating.
You talked too about the role of catastrophe in the missionary biography, and the fact that all of these stories seem to start with some kind of personal catastrophe, which I found interesting. Yeah.
Well, you know, in the end, right, it's we're dealing with human beings there, and as much as they present themselves as high-minded and driven by principle or you know, a higher mission, as I say, John had that catastrophic break with his father, and then a few months before he went on his mission, he'd been working as a mountain guide for 6 months of the year in California, and a few months before he went, was a giant wildfire, and the hut where he'd lived burned down. You know, huge catastrophe. The whole park went up in flames. And a few days after that, the permission was lifted in India for foreigners to go to North Sentinel Island. It was a kind of official cock-up. They shouldn't have done it. They were trying. They meant to protect the tribes, but somehow the name of this island sort of slipped through. You know, and if you're John, it's not hard to see how you would have interpreted that. You know, your old life goes up in flames, and boom, there's a new gateway opens, which directs you back to the mission you've always been on. But yeah, I mean, John's mentor, who turned up on the islands and gave him kind of last minute encouragement before he went, his father committed suicide. The guy that I told you about who lost his faith in the jungle, he told me his mother had been an alcoholic, and his father had left or something like that. He was saying personal catastrophe. They leave it out of the books, missionaries, but it's almost always there. There's something other than faith that puts you on that faithful path.